So with more on the actions and talk against Syria, let's join Chris Sands. He is with the Hudson Institute. Chris, we have Canada, the U.S., France, Germany, all saying to Assad, you have to leave. Is that enough clout, do you think, in these sanctions as well that have been imposed so far or not?
Well, I think it's a useful corrective. Remember that the Obama administration had reversed earlier sanctions and sent an ambassador to Damascus for the first time, and certainly since the Bush years, and it seemed to be a signal of betting on reform with Assad. It was important to walk that back, restore the sanctions, and show that the Americans had resolve. The second issue is that people in the Middle East and elsewhere see the West, whether it's Europe or North America, really dealing with economic troubles, and so there's some wonder as to whether there is resolve in the West to deal with an issue on the periphery of their attention when their own economies have trouble. So I think this was important to show, yes, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, and yes, we're resolved on Syria and united.
What about Europe? Will they impose the kind of sanctions that we see the U.S. imposing on oil imports? Because some would suggest that's where the real clout might be, with Europe saying no to oil from Syria, because they take in a lot of it.
Well, Syria doesn't have as much oil as some of the other players, and so the real signal here is what's happening with other Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and others. And they've pulled back their own representation from Damascus, showing real disfavor for this regime. So it may be that the Europeans will finally follow through on sanctions in a way that they haven't done in previous episodes. And
what about the pressure from the UN? We have this report that calls on the International Criminal Court perhaps to investigate war crimes. Will that kind of pressure work to move out Assad?
I don't know. We've seen situations like this before, and when a leader is really digging in, as Bashar Assad appears to be doing, willing to kill large numbers of his own people, he's crossed a line that I think, to some extent, it makes him immune or unwilling to respond to these kind of international gestures. It suggests the way the end game might play out, which is important, but I don't think it'll turn him around. The only thing that'll turn him around is either his success or his ultimately being deposed by his own people.
So if he digs in, if he refuses to back down, is military intervention even an option? It certainly wasn't initially in Libya, but look at the situation there now.
Sure. Well, that's one option. We've also seen some defections from members of the Syrian military who've been willing to speak out against the regime. You could see the military or parts of it turn, or you could see armed Syrians. There's certainly been a lot of weapons moving in and out of Lebanon and into Syria back and forth. You could see Syrians themselves taking up arms to depose the regime as primary steps. Whether you see the West willing to put more troops in the field, the Libyan mission isn't going very well, and of course the U.S. is tied down to some extent in Iraq and Afghanistan at the same time. So it may be tough for Western forces, or NATO forces for that matter, to show resolve for one more mission at this time.
All right, Chris Sands with the Hudson Institute joining us. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Closer to home now, the New Brunswick